It's live. Yeah.
نعوذ بالله من شرور انفسنا ومن سيئات اعمالنا انه من يهدي الله فلا مضل له من يضلل فلا هادي له واشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له واشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله اما بعد. I might even just do the previous lesson again
Okay.
because
Yeah.
we're here.
Yep.
So we covered. Today we'll cover, inshallah, the second hijrah to Abyssinia. The previous lesson was the first hijrah and some of the events that occurred between the first and the second hijrahs. For those of you who weren't here, so basically the first hijrah, the Muslims, it was a small group of people, about 14 people, who managed to escape Mecca and escaped Mecca, and the way they travelled to Abyssinia was different to much ways portrayed in the movie message. So the Prophet instructed them to travel separately and to meet together at the coast instead of travelling as one group from Mecca to the coast.
Okay, just put that.
And they arrived in Abyssinia, the king welcomed them, and Quraysh actually ended up giving up on trying to capture them. They found out that these people had left, and they said they didn't care anymore. They stayed in Abyssinia, but while they were in Abyssinia, about 3 months later, during those first few months, was the conversion of Sayyidina Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, uncle of the Prophet, Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab, and there was one incident at the Kaaba where the Prophet was reciting some verses from Surah Al-Najm. He recited the whole surah. Did you hear for that?
Yeah.
When I was talking about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard about it.
So the Prophet was reciting the verse from Surah Al-Najm in a very beautiful way, and at the end of the surah, there was a sajda. So the Prophet performed the sajda, and the Muslims and even the non-Muslims who were sitting there listening, because of the beauty of the words of the Quran and the beauty of the recitation, they also did the sajda, the non-Muslims. And before they realized what had happened. And then they realized what happened, and they said, the Prophet was reciting some verses. They were praising their gods. Just lying just to make an excuse for themselves. Despite the fact that in Surah Al-Najm itself, Allah attacks their gods. He says these are gods, the names that you invented. Okay, so today, inshallah, we'll cover the second hijrah to. So actually, I'll continue on with that story. So the story spread from Mecca all the way to Abyssinia. The first Muslim refugees in Abyssinia. They heard about Quraysh, all the non-Muslims making sujood, and they listened to Surah Al-Najm, and they either interpreted incorrectly, as meaning that they thought that everybody in Mecca had converted to Islam. They thought there's no point in staying in Abyssinia anymore. Might as well go back to Mecca. So they gathered their belongings and went all the way back to Mecca, then entered the city. They stayed outside the city and sent one person inside to see if the rumor, the news was true. And of course they found out it wasn't true. So they made a decision. The majority of them would return back to Abyssinia. A small number would enter Mecca in secret to take care of some business and then go back to Abyssinia, and another third group, a small group, would enter Mecca not in public, but under protection of their own tribes. So such as Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, he was from the tribe of Bani Umayyah, powerful tribe, and his wife, Sayyidah Ruqayya, daughter of the Prophet from Bani Hashim. Now Quraysh were very, of course, they were angry at what happened. But the torture increased. very much. So the Prophet decided that there has to be a second group going to making a second hijrah to Abyssinia. The second group was about 100 people this time, instead of 14 people. Most of them men and some about 14 women. Again, this was a very difficult decision to make for the Prophet because Quraysh had placed a travel ban on all Muslims leaving Mecca. They even placed guards outside of the city to capture any Muslims, to prevent them from leaving Mecca. So, but the Prophet, the Muslims were able to execute the plan. They had a plan. They were able to escape Mecca and arrived in Abyssinia. Of course, Quraysh were very angry. And this time, they sent a delegation of Sayyidina Amr ibn As and Uthman ibn Ma'dum, I think, to go and convince the Abyssinian king to extradite them, these refugees. The second group so the Prophet didn't select any people at random. So the first group and the second group. These people, the people he selected were people from belonging to the noble tribes, the powerful tribes, rich and powerful tribes. So the second group he selected, one of the people he selected was Seerah Habiba bint Abu Sufyan. So the daughter of Abu Sufyan. She wasn't married, she was later married to the Prophet, but at that time she wasn't married to the Prophet yet. Another person the Prophet selected was Abu Hudayf ibn Utbah ibn Rabi'a. So Abu Hudayf ibn Utbah ibn Rabi'a would be the brother of Hind bint Utbah ibn Rabi'a, the wife of Abu Sufyan. Suhail ibn Amr had three of his children were chosen to go. Suhail ibn Amr wasn't a Muslim yet, but he was one of the important people in Mecca. So later in further down in the Seerah, Suhail will be the chief negotiator for Quraysh during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Another person was Fatma bint Safwan ibn Umayyah. Safwan ibn Umayyah was another important person, and so his daughter was chosen. Another person was Faras ibn Nadr ibn al-Harith. So Nadr ibn al-Harith, you may or may not recall, so he was one of the people against the Prophet, against Islam. What he did to fight against the spread of Islam, the da'wah, he traveled from Mecca all the way to Iraq to study and learn all the Persian stories, ancient Persia, Persian kings, Isfandyar and all those people, at great expense. And he recorded all these stories and he came back to Mecca. And whenever the Prophet would sit and make da'wah, this person, Nadr ibn al-Harith, would come along and start a show, he'd start talking about these Persian fables and stories about Persian kings and shahs and whatever, and he'll bring along dancing girls to sing and all that, just to distract people from the da'wah, what the Prophet was talking about in the Quran. So his son, Faras, was a convert, and he was chosen to go to Abyssinia. Hisham ibn al-As ibn Wa'il. Hisham ibn al-As was the brother of Amr ibn al-As. So these people were specifically chosen to make Quraysh feel, have what they call, have an impact. They felt the loss of these people. These were people from the most powerful, richest tribes in Mecca. The Prophet selected his cousin Jafar Abi Talib to lead the group, to be the group leader. The plan was so successful that just one morning Quraysh realized that all these people were missing all of a sudden. So the Quraysh felt that these people, they felt it. So this second time, as I said, they arrived in Abyssinia safely. The king welcomed them. But this time Quraysh sent a delegation of Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Rabi'a. So both of these people had brothers who traveled to Abyssinia. And not only did they send this delegation, they financed the delegation with a lot of money, purchased gifts, expensive gifts. With his gifts, they would bribe the king of Abyssinia and the ministers and the priests, the archbishop and all that. So Amr ibn al-As arrives, and the delegation arrives. They first meet with the higher members of the church in Abyssinia. They gave them the gifts in order to buy their loyalty, and then Amr goes and speaks to the king. And Amr, of course, had a friendship, a personal friendship, one-on-one friendship with the king. And he tells him that there's a group of people coming. These are foolish young people coming from Mecca. I won't go into the details, but the way Amr framed the way he said it, it was to make it sound like these people were completely useless people. These are foolish people. These people don't know what they're talking about. They're causing trouble. Please return them to us. And of course, he gives them the gifts that he brought with him. So the king says, I can't hand over to you yet. I need to give them a fair hearing, because he was a fair person. He was a fair man. He was just. So he summons the refugees to his court, and then he starts interrogating them. So the refugees, of course, the leader was Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. Ja'far stands up and starts speaking. And Ja'far was a very good choice for the Prophet. He was also very skilled at speaking, a skilled orator. Just like Amr ibn al-As was also a very skilled orator. And the other thing I forgot to mention is Amr also was well known in Mecca and amongst the Arabs that he was very highly intelligent and very good at speaking, and it was very cunning. He wasn't any ordinary person. High IQ. So the king starts asking the Muslims about what Amr told him, and they respond. It's a big long response, but Ja'far manages from a long speech to convince the king that they not only they were running away from a society which was very oppressive, very unjust. They did all sorts of bad things, lived a very unclean, very bad life. People were treated badly. And he says all the evils of society in such a way that when the king hears it, the king would also feel disgust at the way people in Mecca lived. So, and Ja'far knew exactly what to say. And it was at this point the king said, "Okay, you're free to go. You can stay in this country." And he tells Ja'far, Amr, I'm not going to send them back to you. So Amr was very angry. So angry that he wanted to get revenge. He wanted to push the king to get them to kill these refugees this time. So the next day he approaches the king again and says, you should ask those Muslims about what their views are about Jesus. Because Amr knows what the Muslims believe is different to what the Christians believe about Jesus. And he knows what the Muslims start saying, that Jesus is a slave of God, or just to say he's a slave. The king, the Christians will be angry. So he summons the Muslims again. This is the second day. Again, he asks them about Jesus, Ibn Isa, and of course, Ja'far recites verses from the Quran, Surah Maryam. And in the end, he says, the king comes to the conclusion that there's hardly not much difference between Islam and Christianity. And he's holding a thin stick. It says the difference is no more than this stick. And the king makes three decisions then. The first decision is that the Muslims will stay in Abyssinia, permitted to stay in Abyssinia indefinitely. The second decision was to cut relations with Quraysh, because he knew that Quraysh were very bad and mistreated these people. And these two decisions will be very unpopular. So the first decision was to allow the Muslims to remain in Abyssinia. Years later, there will be a revolt against the king. The king will be deposed. And the second, of course, to cut relations with Quraysh, they had already a good relationship and trading relations. They cut that relationship. The third decision the king made was to convert to Islam. This third decision, of course, was kept in secret, not because the king wanted to loved staying in power or anything like that, but he knew that if he could stay as king, he could protect those Muslims and allow them to stay in Abyssinia. If he were to be removed, another person would come, who knows, maybe they might be kicked out of Abyssinia. And we know that he converted to Islam because when he passed away, the Prophet did the janazah prayer for him from Mecca. So these Muslims would remain in Abyssinia from the 5th year of the prophethood until the 7th year, so about 15 years, until Muslims established themselves in Medina, and just at the end of the Khaybar campaign, they arrived. Now, briefly I'll talk about the conversion of Sayyidina Hamza ibn Abi Abdul Muttalib. So basically this was between the first and second hijras. Hamza had gone out hunting one day, and so Abu Jahl goes around looking for the Prophet, Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ. He finds the Prophet sitting by himself near the hill of Safa. He's minding his own business, there's nobody else around, he's not bothering anybody, not talking to anybody. So what does Abu Jahl do? He starts hurling abusive words at the Prophet, just insulting him, without provocation or anything at all. The Prophet didn't respond. So Abu Jahl is angry. He picks up a rock and hurls it at the Prophet's head, very hard. So hard that he injures him. There was blood flowing from the Prophet's head. Now he's very happy, he walks off. There are almost no witnesses, except for one slave girl. This slave girl leaves, and then Hamza has come back from his hunting. She crosses paths with Hamza and tells him what happened. And Hamza, up until this time, had been neutral. So he had not supported the Muslims and had not gone against them. But with the way this girl reported the incident to Hamza, he became so angry, so enraged for his nephew, Sayyidina Muhammad. So what does he do? He goes to look for Abu Jahl. He finds him sitting with a group of people at the Masjid al-Haram. He walks up to him, and he's still carrying the bow that he was hunting with. He takes it off and hits him hard on the head as well. Very, very hard. So hard that he's bleeding. Abu Jahl is bleeding this time. And he says to him, how dare you do this when I'm not following the religion of my nephew? Hit me back if you dare, if you have the guts to hit me back. Of course, there are other people from Abu Jahl's tribes nearby, Bani Makhzum. They see what happened and they get up to punish Hamza. But Abu Jahl calls him off and says, no, what he says is true. I did do what he said. I insulted the Prophet, I hit him, and tells him to back off. And the situation is resolved. So Hamza, of course, when he said what he said, he had not converted, and he only said it out of loyalty to his nephew, because he was so angry at what Abu Jahl did. So he had some confusion. He made a quick dua to Allah to guide him. He went to the Prophet, speak to him, tell him about what happened, and the Prophet told him some things, and made some da'wah to him, and that was when his iman became real. Okay. And inshallah, that's all I have for today. Inshallah, next time we'll talk about the conversion of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. And does anybody have any questions or any comments or anything they'd like to make? سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.